So in this sense, agency is like freedom. This is the way that students often kind of, the word that they use to substitute for agency is freedom. But really, it's the fact that freedom is always constrained within pragmatic constraints that society determines for us in many ways, right? And we will be talking about the concept of agency as we continue to explore the ethnography, and certainly in the conclusion of this semester and the concluding lecture as well. So again, agency is the driver in that story, right, on the road, but you're always constrained by the rules of the road and by the behaviors of other drivers, and that is structure, these rules, social norms, expectations, political and juridical, meaning like legal institutions that organize human life, right? All societies have structures, right? Even hunter-gatherer groups have norms and expectations that guide behavior in those communities. So in other words, it is structure that constrains agency. Can you think of a few examples of agency and structure that might take place on CNU campus? During the period of mask mandate on campus, right? That would be an example of structure, that you had to wear a mask. Agency could be the student chooses to wear what kind of mask, what color mask, right? In other words, or, if there's a design on their mask, is their mask going to make a particular statement, right? I often give the example pictured here of no yelling fire in a crowded movie theater. This, of course, is a reference to Schenck versus U.S. Supreme Court case of 1919. Those of you who maybe took AP US history, for example, in high school, be familiar with this case, right? The idea is that there's, even though we say we have the First Amendment in this country, we do, there are still always constraints on that, right? There are reasons to have certain constraints in society for people's physical and mental health, for example, right? So there are, that would be therefore an example of structure, right? Rules, laws that, again, constrain, dictate our quote unquote freedom or agency. Okay, agency, structure, two very important concepts, not just in anthropology, but in the social sciences and the humanities more generally. You need to know those for the final exam. The two twin poles in the anthropology of suffering. This is a story about, how is it that these two ethnographers came to write an ethnography on this topic of suffering in a way that was really sensitive to people's lived experience, right? On the one hand, Bourgois and Schomburg did not want to emphasize structure too much. Right? This is true really of all ethnographies, because all societies, individuals in all societies, are balancing their agency alongside structure. So every ethnography should reflect the fact that there are constraints on people's behaviors or agency. So if we emphasize structure too much, right? In other words, if we say, oh, wow, look at all the constraints that society, this particular culture, the society puts upon people politically, in terms of their legal systems, etc., then you seem to make all your interlocutors look like they're just dominated, they're victims, they're helpless, right? And that's not reality, right? Because yes, sure, right, people can be victimized, can be helpless in a moment in particular circumstances, but we're never simply purely victims, right? Human behavior is far too complex for that. But on the other hand, it's also important not to emphasize agency too much, right? Because then you can make every human action, everything your interlocutor does, wow, look at their agency, isn't that great? Oh, these interlocutors, they have so much agency, they can, transform the political system or, change their culture, their society. And of course, we all know that that's not the case, right? Um, we don't all have the same amount of power because not all of us are figures of authority, right? There's only one president of CNU. So it's the job of the cultural anthropologist or the ethnographer to find this balance, right, between not seeing people as completely full of agency or having pure agency, but also not seeing people as completely devoid of agency. Bourgeois and Schonberg, right on page 20, we explore the agency and moral responsibility of the homeless addicts we befriended without obscuring the structural forces that impose a gray zone. So again, we explore the agency and moral responsibility. That means they're thinking about agency, right, of these addicts who are living who do not have homes, while not obscuring structure, right? They're not going to ignore the fact that we all live within structures. Okay. Almost done with this lecture, folks, I promise. So a really important anthropological insight. This is an idea that we have started, we've explored a bit over the course of the semester, but this is a point that really comes out in this ethnography. People, interlocutors in all societies, well, in many societies, don't behave in ways that maximize their health, well-being, or survival. Okay. In other words, one thing that some readers this ethnography may think to themselves is that, wow, why is it that the dope fiends in this ethnography are making really bad decisions about their health, right? When they do get some money, they're buying drugs, alcohol, not a nourishing meal, for example. Well, it's important to respect what matters to an individual in whatever particular cultural context they're in, right? So just because you might think that the most important thing for that person is to better their health, is to make sure they're getting a nutritious meal, of course that I also think that, right? But there are many ways to act reasonably, right? Even if it seems irrational or bad on the surface, because what matters to an individual is going to be specific to their lived experience. Obviously, if you're living with drug addiction, right, this is a chemical reaction. The body needs drugs in order to stave off the really painful experience of withdrawal, right? Physically painful. So again, it's easy to judge interlocutors in this ethnography for not being healthy, right, or not making good decisions, quote unquote. But we need to remember that this idea that we should optimize health, strive for the best efficient kind of healthy way of being is a very particular way of living in the world. It's a very Western idea that, for example, you want to live as long as you can. I want to reach 100 years of age, right? That's not, important in many societies. People don't even know their birthday, right? So it's a very highly culturally particular goal to see like how long you live, how long you, how long you can live, how you can be the healthiest human. Remember when we discussed this in the unit on medical anthropology, right? I asked you, what does it mean to be healthy? As you can see here, this is the same image that I used in that slide, in that particular unit. So again, it's important to take people from the perspective in which they're living, right? And not to, again, have this kind of ethnocentric judgment about what people should be doing, because that's based on your values and your value system. Okay. So for next class, I would like you to come to class being prepared to answer following questions. Group 1, are anthropologists well positioned to study power? Why or why not? So again, this will be based on your reading of Righteous Dope Fiend up until the point that you arrive in class, obviously. Again, are anthropologists well positioned to study power? Why or why not? Think about the methods that anthropologists use. Think about the kinds of research questions that we might ask, specific, in general, but also specifically related to this ethnography. What difficulties and ethical issues might anthropologists who study groups in power face or have to consider? The second question is interesting because, of course, these people are not, the dope fiends are not people who are in a position of power. And group 3, what difficulties and ethical issues might anthropologists who study marginalized people like the dope fiends face and have to consider? Again, be prepared to discuss all of these in class, so please have responses prepared for all of these. And we will discuss these in class. All right, everyone, thank you so much for listening to this lecture, and I look forward to our conversation.